magical peeps. How are you doing? Thank you all for joining me for another monthly wrap up. It is October now. That's just, where did this year go? But in September, we were able to finish 8 books, which was more than I thought we were going to finish in September, TBH. Like, work was crazy. I was surprised. But we finished 8, and that is really exciting. So we're going to be talking about 8 different books. And the first book that we read this month was called Equal Rites, and this was written by Terry Pratchett. We read this physically, and it was about 240 pages, and it is a part of the Discworld series. There we go. Sorry, you can't see, but now I can see. So we read Equal Rites. Physically, that's part of the Discworld series. The little synopsis that it's given is a dying wizard tries to pass his powers to an 8th son of an 8th son who is just at the moment being born. The fact that the son is actually a daughter is discovered just a little too late. So that's the little synopsis of the book. This is exactly what happens. That's the beginning of the book. And then the end of it is this girl trying to become a wizard because she was given wizard powers, and how that kind of goes and gets a little crazy. If you know anything about Terry Pratchett or the Discworld series, I love the Discworld series, and Terry Pratchett is one of my favorite authors. And the way that he handles the hilarity of this and of a woman becoming a wizard, which just does not happen in this world at all. Like, women become witches. Men become wizards. That's the only thing. And it starts off with that, and then how they overcome this for the woman to become a wizard. And it's really funny. I really enjoyed it. It was actually, I think, my first time reading it. I started it a while back, but I never actually finished it. I got distracted by other things. But it's funny. It's smart. Like, all of Terry Pratchett's books are very smart in a lot of different ways, and every time you read a novel you get to find something else that you're just like, oh, I didn't catch that the first time or the third time or whatever time. So I was really excited to read it. I rated it a 4.5 out of 5. I enjoyed it. And I think it's largely because I enjoy the world, but it's a good book. It was a lot of funny things that happened into it as well. The second book that we read this month was If He Had Been With Me. And this was written by Laura Nolan. Nowlin. Nowlin. I don't know if it's Nowlin or Nolan. Nowlin. Whatever it is, I'll put it on the screen. And we read this through an audiobook. It was about 8.5 hours. And okay. This was a high school romance novel. And I did not think it was going to be fully focused on the romance part of it. But let me just read you a little synopsis. It says, if he had been with me, everything would have been different. I wasn't with Finn on that August night, but I should have been. It was raining, of course. And he and Sylvie were arguing as he drove down the slick road. No one ever says what they were arguing about. Other people think it's not important. They do not know there's another story. The story that lurks between the facts. What they do not know, the cause of the argument, is crucial. So let me tell you. So that's the synopsis of the book. And I thought it was going to be a little bit more deep than what it was. It's a high school romance. Finn and I can't even remember the main character. I think her name was Autumn. I think her name's Autumn. I'm pretty sure. Maybe. Anyways, Finn and Autumn are neighbors. And no, I'm not going to give any spoilers. Trying to think of what spoiler, because this is one of those books where it tells you almost the end of the story. And then it goes, I bet you're wondering how we got here. And it goes back to the beginning. So they're neighbors. They were best friends. And then they became not best friends. And it's their romance story. And I gotta tell you, I was really hoping this book would take a large dip into a horror type book. It would have made it way more interesting. I'm glad I finished it on audio. If I had this physically or digitally, I would have not have finished it. I would have given up on it. It did not hold my interest. A lot of it was me just kind of listening to it because I was at work and I had nothing else to listen to. And I finished it because of that. And it was just like, just talk. Just talk. You guys are allegedly friends. You guys were allegedly friends. You guys were allegedly talking. Like, this was without spoilers. Let's see. They should have just they should have just talked. They were neighbors. They were best friends until they weren't best friends. And then you find out the reason that they weren't best friends anymore. It was stupid. And if any one of them would have been like, hey, that thing that happened, why? Or, what's going on with that? Or are we good? We good? Would have just saved the rest of the book. Would have saved it. But they were not best friends anymore. They grew apart. And it's... He went into a relationship with someone else. She went into a relationship with somebody else, and they were off living their separate lives. And most of this book is her yearning for him, for the friendship that they had, for their conversations. We get a lot of flashbacks of the time that they were friends or friend adjacent type things. And then when they weren't, and then she was just like, oh, I want him in my life. I want him in my life. Except she never told him that until like the end. And after the ending that happened in the beginning happened, and then we got the ending after that, if I had the book, I would have thrown it. I would have just fucking legit thrown it. I'm like, this is such garbage. This is trash. Like, if you read this, like, I'm not saying don't read it. I'm just saying I didn't enjoy it, but I listened to it, and now you guys get to hear about it a little bit. And I rated it a 2 out of 5. It was, if you do read this, if you do know this, or if you watch the long form video or the TDLR that I'll be putting out at a later date, if you have either two of these people in your life, like some of these characters in your life, just drop the relationship. It's not worth it. You don't need it. You deserve better. If this is a person in your life, you deserve better. Let them go. Like, that's the biggest part, was just know. And I think it was, I'll have to look to see if it was more for like a young adult audience, because, they were in high school. We go throughout their high school years, and then right before they're off to go start their lives. And I remember being a teenager and like, maybe this is it. Maybe this was a large disconnect. I'm told, and I see in like a lot of high school things, like rom-com type stuff, that high school is a large part of people's lives, and it is 4 years of your life if you do it the traditional way. But I was never in that mindset that this was the best it's gonna be, or this is gonna dictate the rest of my life. I went through high school knowing that it was a very small part of my life, and I went through high school being like, all right, I'm ready for the next thing. I didn't really date in high school. And a large part of that was I was weird. I was a really weird kid. I was a weird, nerdy kid. And so I didn't date, probably a large part of that. And I do remember being asked out, and then I was just like, no thank you, or maybe. Like, I knew it was a small part of my life, and the way that I wanted my life to go at that time, I looked at everybody around me and I was like, I will probably never see any of you again. So I'm not going to pretend that you're going to be in my life for the rest of my life. Like, you know, like the high school sweetheart things, like I never thought that was a real thing. I saw it in movies, I read about it in books, but I never thought it was a real thing, like for realsies. And if you know somebody who's had that, that is great. And that's just kind of what this book pushed you to be like, no, they're gonna be together forever because they're high school sweethearts, except they weren't high school sweethearts. They were just besties until they weren't besties. And they never talked about it, even though they apparently talked about everything. And then after they were not high school sweethearts, she realizes, oh, I should have been with him all along. I miss him so much. I love him so much. And I'm like, you don't even know him. Like, excuse me. What? What? But it focuses a lot on high school being just the end all be all of this girl's relationship and this guy's relationship. And they were both just stupid. I think that's what it is. And it goes beyond, you know, being the stupid that you are as a teenager, I feel. But again, it's been a long time since I was a teenager. Maybe that's like the way teenagers always are. Maybe I was like that when I was a teenager. I don't know. It's so long ago. But I did not enjoy it. I did not enjoy it. I was rooting for other people other than the main characters. By the end of the book, I was just like, somebody, like, there needs to be some type of slasher, Crystal Lake, Jason type character just coming along, mowing all these people down. They don't need to be in the world. Like, that's kind of how I felt about it a little bit. And it is I guess a duology. There is a second book from this series. If you read it, if you like it, if you enjoy it, and you want to read from Finn, that's the main male characters. If you want to read it from his perspective, because she did like a Stephanie Meyer type thing, then it's there. I didn't enjoy it. Maybe you will. I gave it a 2 out of 5. It was one of those things where I called my husband and I was like, listen to this nonsense that I am listening to. So that was the second book for September. The third book was pretty damn awesome. So the third book was The Blood of Elves, and what I got was the Witcher Saga series. I got it like on Amazon, and it was the 5 books that it wants you to read in order for the Witcher Saga. So it's the Witcher Saga #1, but if you look online, it's like the Witcher book 3 that came out. And I read this physically, and it was 314 pages. I cannot pronounce the author's name, so I can try, but it's not going to work out. And this one is what I liked about this book. It was very episodic. It was very just little bits and pieces kind of. It reminds me of the opening of the Witcher game. Like, you know, when you're following Geralt and he's following Yennefer and you just see the flashbacks and the flash forwards things. It's kind of like that. It was really neat. And so this one is, let's see. This is the first book in the Witcher Saga series that follows Ciri. But it doesn't follow her from the beginning. So we get a little bit of her backstory and how Geralt came to find her after he found out that she was there and she was alive. And we follow him, and little episodes are surrounding how people are trying to find her. And so Ciri is there. She's at the Witcher compound type thing, and there's Triss Marigold that shows up. And if you guys have seen the game, any part of the games or the show, I think the show, I remember seeing parts of the show in the book and definitely parts of the game. I didn't finish the game. I got distracted. I Skyrim'd it. So I was just like, I'm sorry. The world is just not saved. But look at these pretty things that I gathered. And so the book is very episodic. It was very, very engrossing. Like this author really did a really good job of depicting the action scenes. Like, we get a lot of the backstory on how she went through training at the Witcher. castle. I can't remember how to pronounce the name. I looked it up, but it was when I was reading the book. That was the third book of last month, so. But how she was trained on that, and then how those things interact with all of this other stuff. I just finished the second book in the series, and that'll be for next month because I just finished it. But it is so good, and the way it's put together, and it's just Geralt, Ciri, and Yennefer, how they come together to try and create a future for Ciri. And then all the stuff that happens around that. Like in this book, she's still just a very young child. Like, well, not very, very young, but yeah, like 10-ish. Like she's around there. She's pre-teens, and it's just their adventures. Dandelion's in it. Like I said, Triss is in it. And we get to see how the Nilfgaardians are planning and plotting to get Ciri, and why. Like we get a lot of information on why things are happening, which is really great. But this book is mostly action. It is mostly action, and I was here for it. It was written so well that I just kind of devoured it. And it was so good. But I gave that a 4 out of 5, and that was our third book we read this month. And the fourth book was another banger, I tell you. It was Jedi Search. So this was written by Kevin Anderson, and I read this physically. It was 354 pages, and it is the first book in the Jedi Academy trilogy. And so this book takes place after the first 3 movies of Star Wars. Further in the distance off from that. So this is further along when the New Republic is trying to set up itself as the New Republic. It is trying to, like, diplomatically send out ambassadors and set out a whole new political system. That'll be how they go forward now that the Empire is taken down. And it follows 3 main stories of Han Solo and Chewie, Leia and Mon Mothma, and Luke Skywalker. And what it is it's setting up these 3 different stories and how they interconnect. Like, this book is also pretty episodic. Like, every chapter is a little episode of thing. One of my favorite things I will tell you about this book, without giving out spoilers, is that there is a chapter with Ungoliant blob races. I did not know this was a thing. I did not know that I needed this in my life. So I will actively be going out to find more information on this. And that happens with Lando. And I think that one was my favorite chapter in the whole book. It was very entertaining. But this is, like I said, this is trying to set up the New Republic. You have these 3 different stories kind of going on. You have the political things with Leia and Mon Mothma, and Han tried to do a political thing and did not work out for him or Chewie. And he ends up finding a whole secret area that nobody was supposed to know about. And Luke is trying to find recruits to set up the Jedi Academy to create Jedi Knights. So that's the main overarching theme, is he's trying to set up the Jedi Academy. He asks Leia to find a planet for his recruits to train on. We get to see him find new recruits on these different planets in these different situations, and trying to convince them that they should come with him to be trained. And it's very action-packed. Kevin Anderson also did a really great job on describing the action sequences. They're way different from in the Witcher book. The Witcher book is a lot of, like, sword play. There's magic in there. It's very fantastical. With Jedi Search, obviously there was a lot of physical type of fighting, but there was mostly like star fights and like space fights and everything, and that was so great. And the way that we find out some backstory on the things that happened in the movies and like what led up to some things happening in the movie, it was so good. That lore dump was sorely needed, and I did not know how much I wanted it, especially with the way that current the Star Wars franchise has not given me lore or a good story, this was just so welcome and it was so good. I gave it a 5 out of 5. It was absolutely amazing. I enjoyed it and I'm really excited to start on the second book, which is Dark Apprentice, and yeah, that's going to be soon too. And the fourth book we read this month was A Boy and His Dog. This was written by Harlan Ellison, and I read it digitally, and it was about 77 pages. It's more of a short story novella. I don't know which one was which, but it was a shorter thing, 77 pages. And this Harlan Ellison writes a lot of, trying to think of how to say it, horrific things that are nihilistically fantastical. A Boy and His Dog is one of his stories. He's also very famous for another story. I can't remember it right now. Oh, it's with the AI, and like Wendigoon did a whole video on it. I was talking with my husband about it, which is actually the whole reason why I looked into this story, A Boy and His Dog, because that story was not available for me to read at the time. If I can find it, I'll put it on the screen. And so that's one of the bigger stories that he is famous for. And he writes about some really depressing things. So in this story, there are very few women around. There was an event that happened that a lot of women did not survive. So after this giant catastrophe, it was mostly men around, and the women that were available were abused. And because of this event, it was like a world war, there were like bunkers, kind of like Fallout, where, they had these kind of vault type things set up. Every vault area is a town, and it's underground, and they do not have contact with the outside world as much. On the top side, it's a lot of these men who you're either a part of a gang or you're considered a solo. If you're a part of the gang, you share in the gang's resources. You're solo, you're just kind of off by yourself. And with these solos, they have these dogs, and these dogs can communicate with them telepathically. And these dogs that can communicate telepathically can sense and smell when there's resources around, but they can't feed themselves. They cannot find food for themselves. So they have to rely on their human counterparts to find them food and to feed them. And it gives an explanation in the story on how this happened. And so you have a man and his dog. Well, I guess a boy and his dog. I guess he's like an older teenager, maybe younger 20s. Doesn't actually say how old he is. But this was published in a 1969 short story collection. And so it's in post-apocalyptic settings about a boy and his dog and them finding a woman. Except they didn't just find this woman. Like, she just didn't happen to be there and they found her. Like, I don't want to give away spoilers, but it was not just by accident. And it goes into this whole thing, and it goes at the end with a lot of tough decisions being made. The author did say that he wrote this book after he wrote the story after losing his dog that he had for over 10 years. And this is kind of where this came from. And you can kind of see it, like, talking about the relationship between the boy and the dog, of when the dog found him and how they gone to evolve into the relationship they had while going through this whole thing. It's a pretty short book. It's very depressing. It's very aggressive and angry, and should probably not be read by a younger audience. There should be a lot of trigger warnings attached to this story. So if you want to read it, definitely check out the trigger warning list beforehand, because I didn't know. I had no idea. You guys know me. I just jump into things blind all the time. And I did. I jumped in blind feet first, and I was surprised by a lot of the things in there and a lot of the repeating of the things. And it is written from this boy's perspective, who is just above illiterate. So the dog taught him how to read. And it is written like somebody who was taught how to read by a dog. So it was kind of hard to get the flow of thing. Once you get the flow of how people are talking in there, how he's relaying information, you're able to follow it a little bit more. But yeah, definitely check out the trigger warning list. It wasn't a bad story, and it brought up a lot of things that I thought was very... trying to think of how to say all of the things. It was very thought-provoking. But yeah, it's post-apocalyptic America, and it's, like I said, check out the trigger warning list. I give this a 3 out of 5. It was okay. It was very harsh. It was very non-polished. It was very brutal. So check out that list. But a 3 out of 5 for that one. And the number 6 book we read, the sixth book we read, I can talk, I swear, was Love Letters to a Serial Killer. And this was written by Tasha Coriel. And I read it through an audiobook, and it was about 9 hours. And this one started off really, really well. Like, I was really enjoying it. And then the twist kind of happened, and I was like, I knew it. And once the twist, like, the only part I did not care for in this book was like the little last little bit. Everything else made a lot of sense going into it. But what it is our main character is she's a young woman in a rut. Like, she has a very routine life, and there's some murders that happen and that are being discovered, and she is chronically online. She is chronically on social media. It is her job to create social media content for the company that she's working at. And then when she's chronically online, she finds out about these murders, and she kind of gets sucked into this true crime world where it is very common to find a lot of women in, forums, and you have discussion boards, and you have, the TikToks and the YouTube videos and the Twitter feeds and all of that stuff. And you'll find a lot of women in these spaces, and she gets sucked into that, and it kind of takes over her life. But what she ends up doing is she gets a little drunk one night and decides she's going to write a letter to the accused killer of these women. And she's like a little drunk. She was angry. She was a little emotional. There was some things going on in her life, and she decides to write this letter. And mostly she's just kind of yelling at this man. And she didn't expect to send the letter, but she did. And she sent it and kind of forgot about it until she receives a letter back. So they end up corresponding, and her feelings towards him turn a little bit. They turn from, I'm angry at you, how dare you, like, you deserve to rot in hell for the things that you've done. And we get to read these letters back and forth, like her responses to him and what he wrote back to her, and see how this changes. And I thought it was going one way completely, and it didn't go that way. I was a little bit surprised by that, but she ends up doing this, falling in love with him through these letters. And then he has his trial that he has to go through because he was arrested and accused of killing these women. And So we're going through the trial, and then it goes to after the trial and what happens after that. And then after the trial, we find out that there's a huge twist in this. And up until that twist, everything's kind of how you would think this would go. Of a woman like this corresponding with a man presented the way he was. Like, it kind of makes sense. And you're like, okay, I get this. Once the twist happens, like, it starts before the twist happens, there's some things that kind of puts into place where you're like, I'm not really sure what's happening here. And it turns into a mystery thriller. And that was great. It was a good way this story went. And then the ending happened, and the ending, like, I guess the epilogue part of it, I was just like, this woman does not deserve this. This woman does not deserve this. But after a while, I was just getting really annoyed with her, mostly because she was doing a lot of things that she should have known better to do. But she thought way higher of herself than she should have. And that was probably what it was. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Like, it started off super strong. And it was building up, and then it just kind of died down. And I expected a little bit more of it. It wasn't a terrible book. It was okay. 3 out of 5. It was okay. And the 7th book that we read this month was Circe. This was written by Madeline Miller, and I read it digitally. It was 393 pages, and this is a retelling of the Circe's myth in, I think, Greek mythology. Is it Greek? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Greek mythology, and this is the 2nd book in this whole series type thing. The first one was called The Song of Achilles, which I did not know was the first one, but it makes sense in this one because it's a lot of information is brought up with that, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's from the first book. But you don't have to read the first book to read this one. So I do not know a lot about Greek mythology. And so I wasn't able to tell if this follows closely to what the mythology was, or if it completely went off the rails with it. But it is a retelling of that. And this is what Circe is in the book, is just so sad. This is a very sad book. It's very depressing. It's very kind of like soul crushing. It'll give you moments of soul crushing, just depression and sadness. And then it'll ease up on that. And then it'll come back into some soul crushing sadness. Everything that happens in this book, you get an explanation of why it happened. And you can see like different angles of it on why things would happen. You know why she feels the way she does throughout the whole book. But it follows her growing up and then being banished to an island by Zeus, and then all of the things that happen while she's banished to that island. And the relationships that she builds up with different demigods and gods, and her whole relationship with her family. And it brings in different myths from Greek mythology in it. Like you have the Minotaur, you have talks about Poseidon and all of these type of things. And what Circe is she is a sorceress. She's a witch. And the book goes into how she finds this out. And then how she uses this, and it does get her banished to an island, and what happens after that, and how she builds up some things, but also at the same time, as somebody who is on the outside, you're like, oh, no, or yes, or like, I understand the motivations of these other things, but you know, she was sequestered off. She has no idea. She doesn't understand. And a lot of the times you're just like, no, just don't do the thing. Don't do the thing. Just walk away. Just don't do it. Don't do it. Or something like, oh, it's so good. Like I said, it was so depressing. It was so great. It was so terrible. It was just so great. I really enjoyed reading this. Like it was something where I had to go back to like pages and reread a thing because I was like, I didn't read that right? Like that's not what happened. That's not a thing. And then I go back and read, I'm like, oh yeah, that happened. That was a thing. And what it really made me want to do is just look up a bunch of Greek mythology. Like I have a list of names in my little notebook where I keep notes on the books I'm reading. And I have names in there of like, well, I don't know what happened to this, but they're a footnote in this. And I know an overarching type story for this, but now I want to get in there and I want to know the details just because this book mentioned it in a passing type way. And it was really well written. It was very well written. And the thing that it says on the back of the book with unforgettably vivid characters, mesmerizing language, and page-turning suspense, Circe is a triumph of storytelling, an intoxicating epic of family rivalry, palace intrigue, love and loss, and as well as a celebration of indomitable female strength in a man's world. And I gotta say, the characters were absolutely vivid. The language was memorizing in some places, and I learned some new words, so I was like, oh, okay. It was very page turning, but I don't know if that's because of the suspense or the language. And yes, the family rivalry, the palace intrigue, the love and the lost was definitely there. And the way that she did find some female strength, I gotta say, the ending did not scream, she's finding some female strength. Like, the ending did not. I will fight against that. It's just saying, I won't say what it's saying in this video, but it did not scream of that towards the end. But I gave it a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed this. I'll probably get this on digital if I don't get it physically. Like it's one of those stories that I want to read again, and I want to highlight things, and I want to take notes, and I want to research the other things that are connected with this. And I definitely want to read the first book in there. But yeah, 4 out of 5. It was a really good book. And the 8th book that we read this month, and it was the final book we read this month, it was a good one to finish on, was The Eyes Are the Best Part. This was written by Monica Kim, and I read it through an audiobook, and it was a little over 9 hours. And this is a horror thriller novel, and it was so good. It was cringy, it was horrifying on some of it, and it was a look at, it reminded me a lot of the book The Fetish. I read that book earlier this year, and that one was more of a goofy type of look at how Asian women are fetishized a lot. And it was like not too, like in comparison, it was a more funny, not relatable, but funnier, lighthearted, even though it touched on the themes and you got to look at the larger part of how this happens and how it affects these women. This one took that how Asian women are fetishized and put you in the seat of one of these women, and you got to see through her eyes how this affects her. And it was so good. It was so good when you look at it and you just read through it. And the further I read into the book, the more it got just good. It reminds me of just a lot of classic like Japanese horror type movies like Audition, and how it starts off just like mostly normal, like all the type of things you don't really know it's a horror movie yet, or it shows you that it was, but it's just like backstory and it's just kind of calm, and then bam, crazy all over the place. And that's exactly how this book was. This is not Japanese, they are Korean, and oh, it was so good. It was so good. And the cover, everything makes sense. Just with the cover that I saw of it. And I was like, this is just so good. This is definitely one that I want to buy and I want to read. And I definitely want more from this author because it was just beautifully written. And the way that it went, the way when it went crazy, it went crazy. And you can see that in the writing and how things were. And before that, everything was very structured, everything was very detailed, and it was written really well. And then the way that the writing changes with the story and how it gets crazy. And the ending, I was surprised about. Like, I didn't think that was going to happen. I thought I was going to be disappointed. Like, there was an instant where I was like, oh, okay, that's how they're ending it. And then it's just like, nope, that's not how we're ending it. And then I was like, oh, snaps. Okay. Like, well, damn. It was so good. It was one of those books that if this was made into a movie, it'd probably be one of my favorite horror movies to watch over and over again. And that's saying something. I watch a lot of horror movies, so to have one that's just regular in my rotation, like it was so good. It was really enjoyable. I gave it a 4 out of 5. It was it was so great. I really enjoyed it. But that's what I read in September. And we hopefully will be reading a lot more in October. I have some more time on my hands now. I got my promotion at work, so I'll have my more steady schedule. We'll be able to add some streams on. I may be changing my upload schedule if depending on how everything works out. This is going to be my first week, so I don't know how much time I will have. I just know I will have more, which is super exciting. But thank you guys so much for joining me. You guys are amazing and awesome, and I appreciate every single one of you. If you guys want to see a more in-depth look at my reviews for these books on Storygraph, or when I read them, or you want to read a little synopsis of that, my Storygraph will be linked down below. You can also look at your local library. If you are in the United States, you can find your local library to see if these books are available. I did get anything that I did not physically own through my local library, audio or digitally. And I will also put down, if you want to buy any of the books, you can buy them through your local bookstore and not through Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And you'll be supporting your local bookstore, and I'll put those links also down below. And if you want to hang out with me, if you want to vote on the next book that I read through my physical library, all of my socials are going to be linked down there as well. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. You guys are amazing and awesome, and I appreciate every single one of you. I hope you all have an amazing day, night, afternoon, whatever it is where you are. Hopefully, I'll be talking to you guys a lot more and a lot sooner. All right. Thanks guys for hanging out. Bye.